Jeff, can you say something real quick?
I could say something real quick or quicker.
Okay. I believe we're ready to go.
Alrighty.
All right, here we go. Counting down on 5, 4, 3, 2. Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are, everyone, and welcome to day 4 of the Butterfly Project. For those of you who have been following along, our whole goal after this 1 week of very condensed content is to help your caterpillar of a company turn into a lovely butterfly as we transform from a regular marketing and sales organization to a great marketing and sales organization. I'm so happy in today's session to bring on board one of my personal favorite sales gurus, Jeff Thull. Say hello, Jeff.
Greetings, everyone.
And I want to start with a little story. Many years ago, I'm going to call it 8 or 9, I was asked to speak at a growth conference, which was sponsored by Vern Harnish and the Gazelles Group back in the day. Now they're called Scaling Up. And I went on stage, I did my very best. And when I was done, I sat down at the table where all the speakers were sitting. And who was the person who came up after me? It was our friend, Jeff. And Jeff started to give his methodology on sales process, sales strategy, and so forth. And while I was sitting in the audience, I immediately broke out into a sweat because everything he was saying was so true. And it affected me so greatly that I immediately got a copy of his book, Mastering the Complex Sale. And I read it front to back on the plane ride on the way home. And when I got back to my office at Square 2, I immediately revamped our sales process to match up with Jeff's recommendations. So I wanted to make that public proclamation that Jeff Thull has absolutely changed my world. And I've been a devotee of his ever since. So Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time to join our crowd today.
Hey, Eric, it's one thing to teach it. It's quite another to execute. So my kudos to the chef.
Really appreciate that. And we've had great results taking people through the step-by-step process that you recommend and really looking at all the different areas where we can improve. And now we have a very high close rate. And I think generally our prospects have a good time going through the sales process because it's definitely more consultative than it is, what can I do to put you into a Chevy today? And I do appreciate your input.
Well, you have the voice for that.
Right. Our format today is going to be questions and answers. And Jeff and I have put together a set of questions that I think our attendees would really enjoy learning the answers to. So let's jump right in. A quick note before we begin, though, for all of our attendees that have questions, please hit up the chat bar and make sure that you put your questions into chat. And at the end, or maybe we'll stop in the middle, depending on how many questions we have, I'll ask Jeff those questions so that we can have a nice free-flowing experience today. So thanks again for using chat. So welcome to an interview with Jeff Thull, a sales transformation using digital to close more new customers faster. Jeff, let's start out with a little bit of current events, right? This year has totally propelled all of our sales organizations forward by years due to COVID. In your travels and work this year, what has been the single biggest transformation that you've seen in sales?
Well, first, I haven't traveled 100,000 miles this year, and I've enjoyed it immensely. So, but seriously, in that light, I think of how much additional time, even though you do work on the plane, how much additional time, that's 500 hours, I believe, if you do the math on that. Or yeah, anyway, that obviously we've moved to virtual in our sales calls, as well as our internal meetings and so forth. We've just ramped that up. And I don't think it really was used as much for sales calls. I mean, we have clients who would fly from Houston to Dubai for a 2-hour meeting. And what they've found is it's not necessary. What's interesting about it is that dramatic sort of shutdown. You had 2 groups responding. One group adapted, and that's probably less than 10% of the population. And the other group stalled. Just what am I going to do? I can't physically go see someone, sort of thing. And that's not an unusual response to a crisis. Those 10% literally take what's handed to them, thrown at them every single day, and adjust to it. So they're used to it. So now those that have adjusted to it are finding they're having higher quality calls, conversations. I mean, think about the whole concept of developing trust and early in a relationship. We're talking to each other, in our home, or maybe less seldom in the office, but we're having that conversation quite privately, really face to face. Then instead of, if you have a lot of travel involved, instead of 2 or 3 of those good conversations per week, you're going to 2 or 3 per day. So think about the productivity of that. And I think most people just didn't stop to realize how powerful that is. And those that have will probably not be going back entirely.
So the 10%, we give them credit, right? They kind of rolled with the punches and they changed their behavior, and now they're flourishing. And I would count our firm as one of the 10%. We were like, oh, we can't go to conferences? Okay, we'll set up some Zooms and we'll just keep going, and kind of like feeling our way each day. But let's talk about the 90%. So like, what are they going to do?
Literally, I've had clients new clients that have come to us saying, my salespeople have absolutely stalled out. I might as well take some time to train them. And I said, no, we're going to have to deal with their stalling out first, because that has nothing to do with COVID. It has to do with their mindset and how they approach, not like you just described your firm's response. And so we looked at having people look at the process differently, obviously, is what we're always doing. But most people see selling as they are sold to. Now, if you think about that, most people in a company, in an operating decision executive mode, what's the majority of salespeople they're dealing with? It's not the ones calling on them in their company. It's the ones calling on them personally. So everyone has that impression. That's what selling is. Therefore, I can't do it virtually, would be a first reaction. And then the second reaction is, I'm not even experienced at doing the Zoom type of thing. So we had to introduce the process that said, oh, that's what sales is about. For example, in this day and age, there is no excuse for going on a sales call unprepared. Yet that high percentage is going in there to do their tap dance the same way they did it on the last call, with no concept of any difference in the business, the position of who they're speaking with. So now I wouldn't see going on a call, be it virtual or face-to-face company, without preparation. Now, preparation would be obviously what I could do on the web, disconnected from interacting with the customer. But I typically would look at making 3 to 6 calls into that company, key areas that my solution impacts, and understanding that individual who's in charge of that performance piece. And when you have the first call with the executive, you're basically discussing what you've understand to be the situation and get their feedback. So I think, probably a long way to answer your question, but it's back to having people understand the real process and the real objective. And we call it Era 3, and we may want to talk about those differences. But now that I understand what I'm supposed to be doing, it makes a lot of sense to do it this way. And that's where we've got to get them to make that transformation.
Yeah, I think that the audience would really like to hear your different eras that we've gone through. But I just want to have one follow-on question to the folks that are stuck.
Yeah.
The opposite folks that you've been working with, there must be some really cool innovations or interesting things they've done to kind of adapt to COVID. Can you share with us at least one story of a client who's really like going above and beyond to make the virtual experience excellent?
Well, all of our clients are, involved in business to business. And as you would expect with diagnostic selling, you're looking at the customer's business operation, business process, the metrics they use for measuring performance, and you're looking for deficits in that performance that your solution set specifically is going to affect. So you have analysis that takes place. Historically, that analysis was done quite late in the cycle, in the sense of I'm now designing the solution. So what we've seen is moving that analysis or diagnosis up to the front end of the process. And historically, you used to try to schedule it when all the key people you were going to meet with to do that analysis were in the office. Enough said. That nightmare's gone away. Now you're able to get that scheduled very quickly. All right. So I think some of the most innovative things is clients have taken analysis capabilities and organized them in a manner that became very attractive to the prospective customer. It's, yeah, I'd like to know that. And therefore it's done early in the process. And it takes the conversation that the customer is expecting to do, which is tell me about your shtick, and so why is it better than someone else, and why is it so expensive? We're spending all our time talking about the solution. The customer really is open to have someone analyze their situation, and that's, most people are missing that receptivity.
Yeah, that's great. So to put it in a little bit of context, give me a little bit or a brief definition of the eras that you referred to earlier.
Okay. So and this was a study we did, John Sullivan, who's our director of learning and design, was teaching a class on instructional design of sales training programs at the U of M. So to do that, you typically do a teach on the history of the discipline. And he looked at articles and books that have been written over the years on selling. And he looked at basically the skills that were being taught, the responsibilities, what was the salesperson asked to do, and what was the general approach. So in era one, you had that well-known show up and throw up sort of thing. It's really totally, I'm going to tell you about my stuff and you'll decide to buy it. And if you don't decide to buy it, I'll tell you why you're wrong and handle the objections. All right. The second era is when we started to think about maybe we should be paying attention to the customer, seeing them as unique. And it was the era of the counselor seller, the consultative, the problem solver. We would ask the customer, what's keeping you awake at night? What sort of problems is that creating for you? And we would, with that information, package up our best form of solution that would address it, and then we bring it back to them. Now, Era 2 sounds pretty good in that it was about questions and needs analysis, and it was about trust and relationship and solutions. The really interesting assumption that lies underneath Era 2 was that the customer did understand their problem. and they knew what they needed in a solution. And so you basically were collecting the customer's self-diagnosis and self-design of their solution. Now, in context, think of how radical that was to the other guy that just showed up and didn't give me a moment to say anything. So you differentiated yourself through that process. Now, is that assumption holding true for your business is the question I would ask the audience. Can your customer self-diagnose the problem accurately that you solve? And can they figure out what the solution should be? Or do they need outside expertise? And if the answer is they need outside expertise, there's where we go to era 3. And era 3 is about a salesperson that understands the customer's business first and foremost. They know how they make money. I didn't need to know anything about my customer's business back in era 1. Didn't care. So they know how they make money. They know, if you will, the jobs that are being done that our solution enhances in some way, that performance metric measurement and everything. And they are configuring that solution beyond what the customer would have seen. So a really key difference, era 2 and 3, is era 2 were questions the customer already knew to ask themselves. So think about the what keeps you awake at night. Do you have a budget set aside for the investment? What are you expecting the solution to do? I mean, just think about, those are all great questions that we learned back in the 70s, in the 80s. And because the customer is well informed, we got good answers back. The one problem to that is our competitor got the same answers. All right, so era 3, we're asking questions that the customer did not know to ask themselves, to ask about the problem or to ask about the nature of the solution. And in that manner, I mean, think about doctor-patient, attorney-client, all of those professionals are expanding the customer's awareness of the issue and the options available and collaboratively putting together that solution.
So that's just a fabulous explanation of where we are today. And, from our perspective, we're a big HubSpot shop using the software to really drive sales and marketing results. And one of the things we started doing, to your point, was moving that diagnostic, or in other words, asking our prospective clients to get inside their HubSpot instance to start looking at some of the data and the activity, and then bring to light some of the things that they definitely didn't know what was happening. Yeah. That is a perfect example of what you were referring to, that by moving the diagnostic up front, now you could have a conversation like, I'm your doctor. I've done a full set of diagnostics. Where you thought it was heartburn, it's actually a cardiac problem. And let's talk about that, because the person wouldn't know what questions to ask. That's fabulous. Yeah. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about like some of the digital tools that some of your clients are using in that sales process, because Zoom is an obvious one. What else are they doing from a digital perspective that could help them work remotely?
Well, if I'm gonna go back to the, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the site, but there's an individual that studies a lot of these digital tools, and she has a poster of the logos of all of them, and they're grouped into categories.
Yeah, there's like 8,000 logos on that poster, right?
Yeah, and they're all really good. And I think, my best answer back on that is we're helping our clients incorporate whatever they already decided would be helpful into the process we just described. And I think the biggest problem with all of those is they're attractive to senior sales and marketing executives, and they're tangible. So let's buy it. And think back to when we all bought CRM, and how many generations did we go through before things ever really took hold? And they're not really taking hold yet for many companies. So what I thought would be important to think about is what's the underlying process that you want that tool to impact. And then when you install it, don't do a blanket sheep dip type install. I mean, this might be well known or be quite terrifying, but about 53% of salespeople shouldn't be in sales in the first place. So you really ought to think about that when you think about adoption rates of these great tools. And also think about it when you're hiring, that if you're hiring from experienced salespeople, half of them are probably bad in the first place, and your odds might be better hiring non-sales. And by the way, our clients in medical technology hire nurses. And the key here is they understand the customer's business and can interact into it. So pick it out. What's the job you wanted enhancing? Where does that job fit in the overall process? And then roll it out with a couple people. Now, I'm thinking of a couple examples that have been executed, some very good analytical tools, simulation tools that are, again, helping the customer understand the situation they're in. And one of the walls that I think sales management doesn't think about as much as they should is literally the intellectual capacity of a bright human being. In other words, we have clients that are rolling out simulations that will take a minimal data set and simulate the financial impact of the status as is, and simulate the impact of various options of their solution, that you can actually look at a working model of your business and recognize that. When you do that, you're asking someone to become an expert in simulation, and you already asked them to be an expert in your product. And that's a whole category of how broad should that expertise be. And what they did, which is very successful, is they set up value simulation experts, specialists, that work on a 1-to-8 ratio with the sales team. So it's like a physician bringing in a radiologist. I mean, the physician can take the MRI, can probably look at it and see some things, but it takes the guy that's doing it every day to do it well. Okay, we like to use the medical model a lot because it's the closest thing that I've seen repeatedly say this is how the salesperson customer relationship should carry out. This is how the diagnostic should carry out, the surgery, the aftercare. It's just full of examples. All right. So what should your team look like? And you know, this splitting is already being done, where we have someone who's just, making outbound calls to set an appointment, and the salesperson comes in to carry out that appointment. Coordinating that and really recognizing, remember, we have our bottom base foundational process, and then what are the roles and responsibilities through that process, Should there be a handoff for the reasons we just discussed? What should that handoff be? In other words, what's the criteria for the handoff? What's the deliverable to the next party who's taking the responsibility for the patient, the opportunity to the next level? And now back to your question on the tools, which part, where does this tool fit what's taking place? I think more often than not, management arbitrarily adds something to the pile, and it's as bad as, well, they're already there, they're already doing this, we can just add that to it. And we do not think about the capacity time-wise. Oh, it's going to save time. Well, therefore they'll have time. Those types of things. And by the way, I'll also place the blame on the folks selling those things. They know the pitfalls. They know the constraints to successful implementation. And too many of those are interested in making the sale, not making a successful customer.
Yeah, I mean, salespeople have a hard time playing the long game because the short game is so enticing. So you're right.
Yeah.
So, you're the sales process guru, and a lot of our clients and people on the meeting today are smaller or emerging businesses, right? So just like you really influenced me into setting up our sales process, what would you think would be the first step or two in developing a sales process? And let's say you now have a half a dozen salespeople and they're all kind of doing their own thing, and you want to bring them in because you're ready to really formalize your sales process. Give us the initial few steps on what people should be thinking about when creating that process, please.
And I'm gonna take you back to the beginning, because actually I just had a conversation yesterday with a CEO, a brilliant technology, and he's the engineer technologist that invented it. And the first step here is, as you know, is we don't think of our process as a sales process. We think about it as a decision process. So I think someone should get there in the beginning. In other words, you're an expert, you're advising your customer. The number one tool of all professional advisors, and we mentioned doctor, we mentioned the accountant, financial, attorney, all of them bring to their customer a high quality decision process, and then they guide their customer through it. The customer is obviously a critical part of it. I'm the patient, I'm able to express what I'm feeling, experiencing, and so forth, but I can't go through it by myself. So with that in mind, think about this. If you invented your business, if it's technology or if it's a service, you likely have a really powerful knowledge of the business you're selling into. That's what made you think of the idea of the solution. Okay. My question to every company would be, if you were your customer sitting down to make a decision, should you buy something like this? Should you make the changes in your business to incorporate it? All of that, how would you make that decision? And every time we do this with a client, consulting wise, we always extract out a brilliant process flow. Because, well, I would look at this, I would measure that, I would make sure this connected to that. It's all of that. So now you have a process. And by the way, the sale, the sale is the designed outcome of the process, but it's not the process. And I think that's a major problem, because companies are teaching a selling process. They're tracking the steps of the sale in their CRM. They're forecasting based on the steps of the sale. They're forecasting based on the activity of the salesperson. when you build your process as a decision process, you're monitoring the condition and the activity and the decisions of the customer all the way along. And it's much more accurate as a forecast. So the other thing is you pick that number 6, 7 really accurately, because that's about the point that the sales organization leaves the arm's length or choking reach of the founder. Like up until 6 or so, the founder is pretty much in and around and correcting as necessary with their expertise. So I advocate it really ought to be done from the beginning, and the first salesperson you add needs to see you have a system, you have an approach, how you think about it. You'll be better able to transfer your expertise, and you'll hire better, because half of that sales hires you don't want, when they hear you have a well-defined process and system, they'll run immediately. I don't want structure. I don't want to be told what to do, etc. And when the goal-orientated individual sees that process and structure, they see a direct path to their personal goals. Anyway, the cascading effect.
No, that's fascinating, is to really stand in the shoes of prospect, because you're the expert. You know what they should be asking. Just design your process around that. And by doing that, you're not selling, you're guiding them through this experience of figuring it out. I think that's great.
Exactly.
So I want to talk to you about sales operations. People have really been talking more and more about sales operations over the last couple of years. Can you give us a little bit about how you define sales operations, and then also guide your clients into how they can create that function in their sales team?
Yeah. That's a great area to be thinking about. And again, what's the mindset you have as leadership or ownership around this? And I would suggest sales operations is to selling results, as manufacturing operations is to quality manufacturing results. All right. Same thing. However, sales is not really approached that way. And hopefully more and more people are getting into it. But I mean, think about just this one concept, that 80% of the sales are coming out of 20% of the salespeople, which has been a long going, everyone accepts that as normal. I would suggest to you, more recently, it's about one client, we just did the analysis as we started working with them, 93% of their volume came out of 11% of their salespeople. And in a 200 salesperson organization, they had 142 salespeople who sold nothing the previous year, which was 18. Okay. Wow. Nothing. No sales. All right. So show me a manufacturing operation that has 10 machines, 10 manufacturing lines, and 93% is coming out of one line, and they're not taking a look at the other 9 lines.
It's unheard of.
No, absolutely. So coming back to, the question, that's the way we need to start looking at it. And operations is about making the process effective and efficient. So you've got to set up that process we've been talking about, and there's where you're going to get your effectiveness. And then you would move on to efficiencies at the various jobs that need to be done as you go through, or the various processes that you're looking, I'm setting up the sales decision process for what your customer needs to decide. Now the sales process, sales operations is what we need to do to carry out that whole process. And so now you're looking at the individual parts, pieces, roles, deliverables, measurables, and that's what sales operations should be all about.
No, that's great. And I loved your analogy about the 10 production lines. Like, that's so visual that people can understand that. No business owner would allow 8 or 9 of their machines to just lay idle while one of them is producing 93% of all the materials. That's great. I'm going to use that with your permission. Because, look, we're a marketing company and this is the Butterfly Project where we're talking about sales and marketing transformation. Give us a little bit of what you're seeing in the field about that alignment between sales and marketing and where that's going into the future.
It's been a constant conflict, not really any more so than other silos in companies. And what I guess what's interesting about it is if you look at the silo concept, there are, I'll call them individual or functional objectives and goals and measurements. And the more we evolve that silo of marketing, the more the tendency was for them to move away from any consequence to the sales silo. And the point is, what does this activity in marketing have to do? What's the deliverable to sales? What's the metric? What's the quality measurement of that deliverable? And the sequence of it. I mean, I'm thinking of things about brochures where the marketing metric was the number of brochures given away we had a really great trade show. Why? No boxes to take home.
Right.
And the other real interesting thing, it's something we call cross-functional dysfunction, and it affects the sales process enormously in that you're selling a solution that impacts multiple functions in your customer's organization, and they likely have competing objectives and measurements, conflicting objectives and measurements. So I want to look at what am I. Marketing is developing a lead, for example, and let's just say they're developing it in a diagnostic fashion. Now, to give you an idea on that, if the marketing direct mail piece traditionally is all about the product, and would you like one of these? Here's the great things it does, so on and so forth. I go back to the medical world again. If you look at medical brochures, their marketing is the 7 early warning signals of insert disease here. And the potential patient sees that advert, gets that brochure, picks it up in the exam room at the doctor's office and says, whoa, I've got 4 of these. What am I going to do? And the call to action is you need to talk with your physician about it. And that's how the patient then begins the conversation with the physician, is I got 4 of these things and it says it's lights out, and the physician is, no, calm down. It's okay. Those same symptoms could be leading to and you're in the professional advisor conversation. So now go back to the conflict. If I do a diagnostic brochure and my customer is ideal, and the customer is set up to have a diagnostic conversation with someone who's going to advise him or her, and the salesperson shows up, and let me tell you about this. It's blows up worse than ever. I mean, that's an example we frequently dealt with where, you know, we've worked with a client, but then worked upstream into the marketing area of the company to help them design collateral that's compatible with the diagnostic decision process. And see, now we're back to the critical nature that you've got to have that process in place before you can be making decisions. What should the marketing do? How should the marketing be? Now, obviously, that's a bias from the direction I come to it, but I know we could talk about beautiful marketing lead development programs that have totally failed because the salespeople grabbed it and did the absolute bad thing with the lead that came in.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, if you would, first of all, salespeople of all the folks in the organization have the most on the street data because they're talking to prospective clients every day. If they would just say, in order for me to do a better job in diagnosis, hey, marketing guys, this is the assets that I need you to create to drive people towards my diagnostic process. If I can get double the amount of diagnoses during the course of the week, I could double my sales opportunities. So I think you're right. And that's where that alignment, but you're right. You know, the marketing's on one side of the building, sales is on the other. And at the end of the day, there's a fist fight in the parking lot because they're just conflicting as opposed to working together.
Yeah.
Great stuff. We're coming to the end of our time together, and I wanted to make sure I asked you a few lighter questions. Jeff, where do you get a lot of your information from? Like, who are you following? And maybe the audience would like to be introduced to some other folks that you admire that maybe could give them different perspective on how to build out their sales process.
Yeah, you know, if the way I want to answer that is as an individual, you need to decide what you're looking for. So let me help with that. It's like I'm a professional salesperson, and what is my sales process about, and what are the skills required to carry it out? And as we've been talking about here, I really need to understand business. I need to understand how my customer makes money. So who in a particular business could I follow that would really help me understand about business? So answer back to your question is, you know, Jim Collins in Good to Great, and all of his material and his writings is an excellent resource for understanding about business. There was a book, Execution. So I'm saying the category of business, and I'm probably answering saying I'm not going after a lot of sales gurus. One, I don't want to lift material, but two, they're mostly error 1 and 2 as they go about it. That being said, I've read numerous sales books looking for what fits into my framework. And there'll be little tidbits here and there that are very enhancing. But yeah, I'm thinking of another example of it's Robert Cialdini. I wrote down some of these because I knew you were gonna ask. I had Tom Peters. Now this is all going towards my age as well. That in my early developments, but Tom Peters is actively writing and blogging today. And the point really is that the key performance indicators of a business, the problems that businesses are dealing with, have not really changed. The technology to address those problems has changed. And the integration of that technology, et cetera, gets it to be more complex. And that's what we were talking about earlier, the potential division of expertise.
Well, you know, it kind of makes sense if you're reading about business and you want to help look at the diagnostic process from a variety of different angles, that kind of makes sense. Because one of the things you said earlier was, I want to understand how my client makes money. And
Yeah.
if you don't have a well-rounded business understanding, because consulting is different than manufacturing, which is different than technology. And if you can understand that, you'll be a better salesperson.
Yeah. And by the way, my product manager really should be telling me that, back to responsibility of I'm putting product management, product marketing into the marketing silo, but they should be coming to me like a drug manufacturer comes to the doctor and saying, here's what a body, looks like when it's working well, or a functioning cardiovascular system. And here are the indications of the problem. And here's what our drug is designed to, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm saying most product managers do not approach it that way. They approach it from the product perspective, and here are the capabilities of the product. So think about that business knowledge on one side. And then Clayton Christensen, who's passed away, but Tony Ulrich is carried on. And Clayton wrote The Innovator's Dilemma, but then he went on and talked about innovation is coming from understanding the jobs that the customer needs to do and building product solutions to do those jobs better. So we build our diagnostic processes by looking at what is the job your product is doing, directly, indirectly, even tertiary, and what are the symptoms that would show up in the absence of your solution in that job. So that's teaching the diagnostic. So I'm staying on top of that, if you will, diagnostic capability. I'm reading the medical stuff. The Mayo Clinic was the originator of the team diagnostics, and they just have great stuff on how to do team medicine, really. And virtual medicine, they're really leading that, and I've followed that quite a bit.
Well, because it's a natural, right? Like we've talked so much about how medical diagnosis is so similar to sales diagnosis. How could you not get some great information on leaders in that area?
And when I was originally doing the research on the process, the method, I pretty early decided that the medical profession was the closest analogy to what we're trying to do, and really what I was seeing that top 5% do. And that just led me into that. And interestingly enough, my daughter went to medical school, became a doctor, and I was able to go side by side with her, not physically, but I followed how they were teaching her how to be a doctor. And that's how we've set up and advised clients, is here's how you develop proficiency in a salesperson. It's the same process and approach.
So my mother would be just as proud if I was a salesperson or a doctor as well.
Yeah, you could break the news to her at least.
Jeff, we're up against the end of the time. I want to leave our audience with one key question for you. If you had to give people a single piece of advice in this wacky world of 2021 that we're currently involved in now, and business is in such flux, what would be that one piece of information you could leave us with that could help them down their path to success?
I'm gonna leave them with the concept of professionalism. And if you look at how professionals develop proficiency, there are three main ingredients. There is the system or the process, and that includes many of the things we've been talking about, the what to do. All right. Then there's the skill area, the knowledge and personal ability to execute the system. That's the how to do it. And then the third area is the discipline. And that's really having the emotional strength, the emotional intelligence to do it in a consistent quality fashion. So if you go about to solve this, to move forward, changing an approach, you're transforming as you go through, what are the systems, the skills, the disciplines that will be required to be proficient and successful at what you're transforming to?
That's absolutely sage advice. Thank you so much, Jeff. For everybody in the audience today, here's Jeff's contact information if you want to reach out to him. I got to tell you, I could sit and talk to you for hours, Jeff. Some of the information you've imparted is just so impactful. Thank you.
I've enjoyed it.
As part of our ongoing content giveaway during the Butterfly Project, today's offer is that you can have a sales process mapping framework where we simply help guide you through the setup of a basic sales process. For those of you that really hung on to Jeff's description of what does it really take to build a good sales process, please marry that information with the sales process framework, and I guarantee you can have a really great initial sales framework. Just for our fans for tomorrow, for today, don't forget to tune into Office Hours, where you can ask any darn question you want of our team here at Square 2, and we'll answer them for you, whether it be sales, marketing, customer service, or somewhere in between. And tomorrow, our last session, which makes me kind of sad because this has been a really fun week, please join Julie Golden in a conversation about customer transformation, how to use digital to grow revenue from current clients. So once again, thank you, Jeff Thull. We really appreciate your time and all the advice that you've given our crowd, and we'll see the rest of you guys down the road. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, Eric.